she's like, Maddie, who is Charlie?
She's like, "What are you talking about? I thought you said this was about." What did I even tell her it was about? I don't know if I even said because I was like, "How do I explain this?" It's about a TV show. Yeah, I think I said I'm recapping a TV show, which is technically true.
Yeah,
It's
it
just
is. It's
not.
not a lie.
It's not on TV.
Right. No, it's fair.
It's a hypothetical television show.
I think
So
it's a challenge that every Ambition fan faces when they have to explain what ambition is, because it kind of defies explanation. So,
yeah,
but if you know, then you know. Okay, hello everybody. Welcome back to.
Ambition Unpacked.
There you go. You'll get it. We'll get the hang of this.
I forgot what we even do. Like, I need to like write it down.
We're like trying to still find our like the opening we're getting a little bit, but the closing like we still don't really have one. So
Yeah.
when it arrives, it'll arrive. Here we are. This is our second episode. We are recapping the second episode of the first season today. Just a quick little organizational note. We've realized at the end of last episode that the fact that we record these 2 weeks ahead means that if you wanted to send a question or a comment about the episode that we currently drop, you would not be able to do it the week that we're doing that episode. So, for our lovely listeners, if you ever want to ask a question about a specific episode or one that's coming up, just feel free to send them at any time, any format, our YouTube, our Instagram. We actually have made a blog for the podcast that we will be sharing when it is fully built, and that's another place you can submit questions. But just go ahead and send a question whenever you want, and we will, at the top of shows from now on, if there's a question that's like kind of retroactively about one we've already recorded, we'll cover those at the top. And then if it's one that applies for a later episode, we will save it and we will talk about it in the episode itself. Like basically, if you're a listener, we're recording 102 right now, and you're listening to 101. So
Yes.
we're going to be one episode ahead of you guys, is kind of just the gist.
And we'll figure it out. It's a learning curve.
Speaking of 102, we are discussing the second episode of the first season, which is called The Phantom of AAA, or The Phantom of AAA, however you decide you want to pronounce AAA. It aired. This is interesting because I have been writing down kind of a few stats for each of the episodes as we'll be going through them. One of those is air date. And the interesting thing about the first 5 to 6, 7 episodes is I actually do not know the exact air date anymore because
Oh.
I posted the first 7-ish episodes on Tumblr first, and we hadn't made an AO3 for it yet. There was no Archive of Our Own fic.
Oh.
So the thing about Archive of Our Own that's nice is when you upload a chapter, if you go to the full page index of any fic, you can see what date that chapter was posted. So once we get into season 2 and season 3, I will know exactly what date they were posted. But with about these first 6, 7 episodes, I front loaded a bunch of them on the same day. So it just says, oh, like May 31st, but they were not posted May 31st. So I went back to like the document itself on Drive and tried to kind of approximate based on the versions that exist of the doc
Oh.
what days these would have been finished and posted. So this one, presumably, was posted between May 4th or May 5th of 2019. So about 5 days after the premiere.
Wow. That just really drives home to me how quickly season 1 aired. Like it was really
Yeah.
just bam.
Yeah, it really was. If you think about the span, right? If you look at, we'll talk season 1 and season 2 because season 3 also had longer episodes and like a longer season, and we had breaks in between that were longer. But season 1 was written start to finish, premiere to finale, in about 2 months. It was April 30th to June 23rd. That was the whole season. Then, season 2 was October something something. When we get there, we'll find out. It was October. It was like, later in the year, I'm pretty sure. And then it finished on my birthday the next year, March 21st.
Woo.
So you can see it's like a 6-month difference.
Yeah.
And then season 3, was we started October and then it finished in September? So it was like almost a full year that season 3 was premiering.
Wow.
So you can just see 2 months versus a whole year.
It's almost nicer in some ways, like because I'm one, just a slow reader, and two, it just is nice to savor it. I know there are some people in the
Hmm.
fans who love to just consume everything and spoilers, and I'm just kind of like, why don't we
Are you
cruise?
calling Hanny and Sunny out a little bit?
I wasn't gonna say their names, but yes.
But I'm gonna say their names. For the listeners, it's so funny. My friend Hanny, she's hilarious because she sometimes will just be like, Maggie, can I have a spoiler? Thinking like that I won't say yes. And then I'll be like, sure, what do you want to know? And the problem is that she always doesn't have a question.
Yeah.
Like she's not ready to actually ask for a spoiler. So she's like, dang it, I don't know. So she never actually gets one because she's not prepared. It's just hilarious every time. She's done this multiple times.
So, Maggie, do tell
Yes.
the episode title. Is it based on Phantom of the Opera?
Yes, it is. So the title Phantom of AAA, it is definitely meant to be an homage to Phantom of the Opera, just a little cheeky, a little fun. I will say, this is actually my favorite element of the episode is the title. For an episode that, full disclosure, I don't like this episode. I really don't enjoy it. I would cut this episode and feel nothing about it. That's how much I don't like it. And I'll explain why as we kind of
Okay.
go. But
I have to argue against that because of certain moments, mainly just one moment, which is very important to me, and we will get to it when we get to it.
well, yeah, that is the thing is that there are definitely, I mean, there's lines I really love, there's moments I think are important, but my kind of consensus on it is I am of the opinion at this point that we could have gotten rid of this episode and taken those important moments and putting them either in the pilot
Mm-hmm.
or in 103,
True.
and it would not have mattered. Like we could have disseminated some of these elements. Again, it was just we were not thinking that deep about it. It
Yeah.
was a different time, it was a different era, but I look back at this episode and I just feel like, ugh, I don't I don't like it. I think partially because there's that feeling that it feels like kind of weird filler.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think it's because, and to be fair, I think a lot of shows are like this. Like when I watch a TV show, I usually will give it I'll give it like 3 to 4 episodes to decide, do I like this? Do I like the vibe? Am I into it? Because
Yeah.
I do feel that traditionally it takes time for writers to find their groove and to find their voice. And sometimes it takes, 2 to 3 episodes for them to kind of get in the groove.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that this is a perfect example of that because to me, one of the reasons I don't like it is aside from the few lines that I really love and a couple of the moments, it doesn't really feel like ambition to me. Like it feels like something different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's partially because we were finding what is this going to be like.
Yeah, I agree. It's got very like sitcom sort of premise almost like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wrote in my notes that I think this is almost kind of reminiscent. You can see, I told you about how we originally were like, oh, it'll be like a Victorious type sitcom.
Yeah.
Obviously, that completely changed, but I think this episode and this idea feels like that. It feels way more like the old version of the show.
Yes.
And it's just now in the full context of the whole series so far, it feels so out of place. It is my least favorite episode.
Well, let's just dive in head first and not we'll just brace ourselves.
Yeah, so you're asking about the title.
Yes.
Then I went on a tangent about how I don't like it. But so this I like the title, despite how much I do not like the episode. I think it's a fun title. I think it fits in the realm of ambition titles. We tend to go for like either kind of vague but really intriguing titles or like kind of silly cheeky titles. So I think that works really well. And I will give credit where it's due. Esther came up with this title. So claps
Yay.
to her. It is a great one. I will try to do that as we go through them if I can remember who ended up landing on the right title. But this one was definitely her. I remember pretty distinctly. So this one is, in terms of runtime in our fake runtime chart, it's 44 minutes. It is the shortest episode in the whole season, in the whole series. Thank God for that. It is only 7,022 words. And in terms of the page count and these documents that I have of the full season, it is only 14 pages.
Wow. Yeah, I definitely felt that when I was reading it. I kind of just got through it in like 2 bus rides and like 15 minutes. when I got home. So that's quick for me.
Like, that is the relief about it, is that even though I don't like it, I'm like, well, at least it's brief.
Yes.
It's like you just kind of skip through it. You're like, okay, time for episode 3.
Let's go. Especially because it is so lighthearted as well. You can sort of, I'm not telling people to skim read Ambition, but I'm telling them to skim read maybe this episode and just get to the third one. Just go.
I would not argue with that. I mean, I think, like I said, if obviously I care about Ambition a lot, I don't care enough to go back and edit huge chunks of the first season. But if I were going to, I think I would combine elements of 102 into 103 and just completely get rid of this episode. But we'll talk about some of the reasons why as we go. So let's look at the synopsis. I have it pulled up here in front of me.
Amazing.
It is, life's no fun without a good scare. October brings terror as the techies are forced to skip an important event for the performers. Isadora works on a short film documenting the supposed ghost haunting AAA. Riley has issues adjusting to the intensity of the school.
Yeah.
It's straightforward.
It is. I have like slight issues with the wording just because I don't think it is very clear, but I guess it doesn't really matter. But yeah, is life better with a scare? I don't know. Personally, not a fan. Is it meant to be sort of saying it's Halloween without its Halloween like?
Well, it is definitely a Halloween-esque little. We call these I have a name for like tags, basically, like what these little kind of quippy things are. So the life's no fun without a good scare, though, is just a lyric from This Is Halloween.
Oh, right.
A lot of times our quips will be lyrics or like from different elements of the show. So as we do synopses, I'll explain why I picked one, or because so just to clarify, I'm the one that writes the synopses. That's one of my tasks. And I do enjoy it. I think one reason that this one is not as interesting, one thing I like about writing synopses, and this is much truer in later seasons as there's just more going on, is I like to be very like kind of ominous but like intriguing with it. Where it's like these sentences could mean something, but they could mean something else. Whereas this synopsis is just straightforward. It's like, this is what's happening.
Well, I mean, and that's the thing, is this whole episode is this is what's happening, and there's not really much nuance past that. Yeah, and that's fine. You've gotten really, really good at writing synopses as well. So
thank you.
That's
thank you. Appreciate that.
Practice. This was so early on as well. Like, it'll be really cool when we can talk about how we all like theorized about synopses.
Yes, I'm excited for that.
But at this point, we were really just like living day to day.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think most people were just kind of like, whoa, new Ambition episode. I'm not really thinking about this, but let's see what happens. It takes that first few episodes to, for me, I think most people really got hooked. And I know if I were reading / watching, I would get hooked around season 1, episode 7 with the Techie Revolt. Because that's when you really start to like get to know these characters, and they start having really interesting like character moments. Like, I mean, there's some, of course, in the first episodes before that, but like I think about like there's the Techie Revolt, there's Farkle performing Control by Halsey, and that's like this really kind of like very big character moment. Like, there's just a lot of stuff that happens at that midpoint.
And then in this one, it's like no personality. There's just like basically nothing.
Yeah, it's true. Let's just get into it, because then we can I can complain, and it's, remember, I'm just insulting my own writing, so it's fine. I will say though, like, I don't like the episode, but the writing is fun. Like, it's about the same as, I obviously get more into the flow as I go on, and get kind of just what the tone of the show is, and the kind of quippiness and the narration gets more developed as the show goes on. But like, this is fine. Like, it's not bad to read. It's not confusing. It's just, the story is not great. So
it did the job at the time. Okay. Writing credits is you wrote the whole thing.
Yes. At this point in season 1, I was doing all the writing. But I will say, it's funny, I was talking to Esther about how we were going to be rereading this episode and talking about it, and she knows the fact that this is my least favorite episode, so she was like, well, I guess you can tell everyone this episode was my idea. And I was like, don't feel bad. Like, this was the era that it was at the time, and we were just having fun and being chill. But a lot of this episode, in terms of like concept, was Esther's idea. But in terms of if this was the sitcom version of Ambition, this is a fine episode for that. Like, it's completely a fun concept. It's not that it's bad.
Definitely.
As we know, it just doesn't really fit what the show becomes.
Yeah,
So,
this
no
episode is,
disrespect.
if this is a Victorious episode or, you know, an iCarly episode, whatever, I'm watching it.
But yes, the official writing credits of the episode are just me at this point.
Do you remember writing it at this point, or do you just kind of block that out?
No, it's like, I think, again, because this all happened so fast, it's like I can remember like kind of typing these things out and just being kind of like, because it was so slapdash in season one, where it would just be like, I'd
Mm-hmm.
write the episode, and then whatever day I finished, I'd be like, I'm gonna post the episode now. Like, there was no structure.
Yeah.
So I don't really have distinct memories of like the process of writing an episode the way that I do in season 2 and season 3, because it was just so much
Yeah.
more organized at that time, and I was very much in eras of like, okay, these 2 weeks I'm writing this, versus this was literally like, da-da-da-da-da, okay, post.
Such a different time.
It really was. I think this episode shows that more than anything.
Yeah. Are we ready to jump in
Yes,
to the recap
let's do it.
discussion?
I will say, as we jump in here, we have the same kind of opening that the original pilot opened with, of just with Riley in her room, and we're going for it, we're going for the day. One thing I think that is worth noting is that we have introduced her mood board, which becomes a
Yes.
very big kind of set piece for her. It's from this moment that we see it. It recurs in many, many episodes, and it is reflective, I think, of whatever's going on at the time in that season. I mean, it's in every season after this that we focus on it. So some things were introduced that were important.
I love that. It's like, it's very, it's a very sitcom kind of start to the episode as well. Almost like this cold open of Riley getting up and then going and seeing her dad and seeing Sean, and then Sean like running out, and then them like sort of looking at each other. And
Right. I will say, I think there were moments in here, and I think I will be able to bring these up as we go along, but I'm realizing kind of like moments from my own media consumption that I think I'm alluding to or being inspired by in certain elements.
ooh, okay.
Because this opening, both in the pilot and here, of her like turning off her alarm clock and getting up, is very opening of Hairspray,
Oh,
where it's like Tracy turning off her alarm
oh
clock
yes,
and being like, good morning, Baltimore. Like, I think
love
there's a
that.
little bit of that sprinkled in here. And I have a couple notes like that for this episode.
Well, I love Hairspray, so I'm
Mm-hmm.
totally on board. I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's also good because it was kind of like in the first episode, it was like, okay, like it's the big day, and this is just like, okay, this is the norm now. He's
Yes.
still doing it. She is just waking up, and Topanga is not here.
Yes. Topanga is oddly absent, and Sean and Cory are discussing it, but then immediately stop discussing it when Riley walks in. So clearly some things are being sheltered from her. Um,
Yeah.
Sean gets a text and gets huffy about it and leaves, and Cory takes that as, well, I guess I'm calling in sick today, which is like, here we go. Moment number one, Cory being a shitty teacher.
He really just treats this like, what? Like he's just gonna go study at uni, and he's decided, you know what? Too much drama in the study group. I am just not gonna go in.
The kids don't need me, and maybe he's right about that. I will say
Maybe.
I wanted to touch a little bit on this kind of complexity of Cory as a character, in that he does have this kind of duality of the two roles that he plays, because he's their history English
Mm.
teacher and he's Riley's dad. And I think there's a lot of jokes like in our group chat and kind of amongst different people of like Cory being awful. And
Mhm.
I think it's fun to joke about that, and I think it's just interesting that I think it's a little more complex than that. Like, I think validly Cory as a teacher sucks. Like, he's not a great teacher. He doesn't, I don't know how much people like not in our kind of lore world know this, so I can share a little bit of the lore. But he basically is just, if you've ever had a shitty teacher, this is kind of what Cory is. Like, he's not awful to anybody, but he's very dismissive of students who are not academically gifted. Like, he and Dylan have kind of like a, it's not really a rivalry because Dylan doesn't give a shit, but he like disdains Dylan a lot because he thinks he's like doesn't care and is like a bad student, but like Dylan has ADHD and like is not, he needs to be taught in a different way, and Cory just is not accommodating that. But he's very dismissive of him. So like Asher, as we kind of see in later episodes, he hates Cory. And the reason he hates Cory is not because of the teaching thing, but because of how he treats Dylan. And all of that's kind of like under the subtext of the show. So people just don't really like him as a teacher. But I do think I wouldn't necessarily disdain him that for being Riley's dad, because I think the relationship that he has with Riley is obviously complicated, and it's complicated by things with Topanga and all that kind of stuff, but I do think that they do really care about each other, and Cory does love her and is
Mm-hmm.
trying his best, and I think that he does deserve credit for that. Obviously, he then becomes shitty again when he's being weird about Riley having a boyfriend, but that's a
Yeah.
way later discussion. But other than that, I think he
Okay.
is trying his best.
I'll cut him some slack. I think I mean, it's like, it's nice at least that he has his pal, Sean. I think it's very good that he has a friend, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it's just
Mm-hmm.
male friendships. Let's let's go. But it's a bit weird that he can't do both. I guess it's not that weird, actually. Maybe it's
There are a lot of people in the
really,
world that are shitty at their jobs, so
yeah. Or I was gonna say they're really good at their jobs, but really bad at being parents, i.e.,
yeah.
Stuart at this point.
Yes.
Stuart
Stuart,
Dinkus, not doing a great
Kenneth,
job.
like
Mm-hmm.
lots of people
Mm-hmm.
who are
Mm-hmm.
really good in their professional lives, but not as great. It kind of
Yeah.
reminds me of The West Wing a little bit, where,
Oh yeah.
all of the characters in The West Wing are so good at their jobs. Like, that's their whole thing. And
Yes.
then they're terrible in their personal lives. They just can't
Yeah.
handle it. It's kind of like that.
It is. It's just like that. And I think honestly, like as much as I love the characters in the West Wing, I think it's probably better that Cory is bad at his job and a good parent,
Yeah.
because I think Riley does need one, at least
Yes.
one.
Yes, and I think for the awkward positions that she sometimes is put in, and the way that Cory maybe doesn't always understand her that well, I think we have to give him a break too, because we know how Topanga affects Riley.
Yeah.
She has that effect on Cory too. It's like he is also being worn
Mm,
down by being married to a narcissist for however many years. Like, he's trying to figure that out too. It sucks that Riley is caught in the
yeah.
middle of that, but
Yeah, and he maybe is just like a really bad teacher because I mean, let's just blame Topanga for everything. Um, Topanga maybe like wore him down. She's like, yeah, being a teacher is like fine, Cory. Like, I guess you have a career. Like, I don't know. Do you though? Like, where
I
are you going with
guess.
that? And then she's like, but my career is like a real career and it's like important and I am doing like actual work and you're just, I don't even know, what do you even do in a day? And he's just like,
Hmm.
oh yeah, like I suck. Like he just gets bad self-esteem. And then maybe he kind of takes that out on dismissing his students because he doesn't see the value in helping them anymore. Yes, okay, I'm blaming Topanga for
You're
everything.
building the whole backstory. You're like, I've got it
Oh yeah.
figured out.
Mm-hmm.
The pieces
I'm
are fitting
actually,
together.
yeah, I'm giving Cory his redemption backstory. So everyone just jot that down.
I do wonder too, like, this is completely, no one should take this as necessarily canon. It's just kind of me extrapolating. But I do wonder, the fact that we have Jack and Eric in these kind of positions, not of power, because being a counselor is not a position of power, but they're long term employees at Adams for however much
Mm,
amount of time. And it's interesting that Cory and Sean are both there, and we know Sean was a nepotism hire. I don't think Cory
right.
was a nepotism hire, but I could see, like, if Cory was going through something or whatever, like Eric could probably be like, you're a teacher, maybe not a good teacher, but you're a teacher. There's an opening at my school. Let me see if I can get your resume in, like, so it might not be that
Yeah.
Jack chose Cory to be the teacher in terms of like, I sought him out and he was great, but if you were in a bind and you needed a teacher to jump in, that could be part of the reason that he's there but is
Yeah.
clearly so shitty.
Yeah, like he applied with other people maybe, but Eric just kind of put him at the top of the pile or
Right.
something. Not that Jack cares what Eric does, but maybe Eric like sweet talked some of the other teachers into also being like, yeah, this one seems good.
Yeah. And it
That
also depends
makes
on
Eric seem
how
devious, but
Well, we know he's a little sneaky.
He is.
I think it also depends on when Cory was hired because
Mm,
if if it's before Jack and Eric have really developed their derision, before they
true.
really understand each other or decide they don't like each other, like then it's just like, oh, okay, related to Eric, Eric's fine, whatever. So I think if
Mm,
Cory had jumped in later when Jack and Eric clearly do not like each other, then it would have been like, I'm never hiring your brother, but like it had to have been
wow.
before that.
So you're saying that Eric and Jack didn't always dislike each other this much?
Oh, I definitely don't think so. I think that it took some time. I think because they're both professional. I think that when they first met, first year or two, it was just like new person. I'm sure Eric was actually probably like, let me help you out. Like, I will give you the
Mm,
ropes. I'll help you figure out what you need to do. Come to me anytime. Like, I got you, because that's the kind of person he is. I think that their friction really started when Jack started implementing more organization and more authority, and Eric was not used to that and was very. I think Eric is still a little bit, and he matures out of it over the course of the show, but he's still a little bit in his high school theater kid brain. Like he wants the school in season 1 to feel like the way he wanted a school to be back in the day, and he's holding on to that. And
wow.
Jack's like,
Yeah.
this needs to be organized mentality. Like it just completely,
Yeah.
again, it throws realism into his dreamy head, and he doesn't want it.
Wow. We're really like taking these people apart right now.
We have to make this episode interesting because the episode itself is not
Oh yeah.
interesting.
I mean, we can dig in. We dig in. And speaking of digging in, immediately this episode is just so tense again. Like I know I said that in the pilot.
Hmm.
That has not changed. Everyone is tense. Like Riley's tense, Corey's tense, Topanga is, there's that tension. Sean is immediately tense. Like his first, well, I mean, his first like written dialogue is just him like swearing and running
Yeah.
away. Like so tense. And then it's just people fighting and yelling. Like most of the dialogue in the entire
Yeah.
episode is just people being mean or saying they're stressed or yelling at each other.
And I think that
It,
definitely, it goes to show like what kind of straits the school is in at this point emotionally. Like
Mhm.
we know when Riley walked into this that the whole thing was kind of on shaky stilts, and at either point it's
Mm,
gonna fall or Riley's gonna come in and play fixer. And as we know, it's kind of like both happens. So
yeah. Yeah, I mean, does Riley get her spot because someone else was like, damn, the school? No, I'm not coming back. Hey.
that's a good question. I will admit, like, that's one thing that S and I really try to avoid talking about is the like specifics of the how many students can be in one class because we need the plot of that in season 2. It's like so crucial to the plot because of Lucas
Yeah.
and Missy and Charlie and that whole thing. But we also were like, well, Riley came in, so I guess someone had to have left, and like Wyatt left, so it's like we don't really know the rule, and we're just like, there's a rule, but we're not going to tell you what it is because we don't
Yeah.
want to figure it out. So just don't worry about it. But
Yeah.
I honestly,
I'm
I
good.
wouldn't be surprised if someone left after freshman year because I'm thinking about when I was at my elite film school screenwriting program. We had
Hmm.
about under 30 people in our program, and within the first semester someone was like, yeah, this isn't for me, and they switched to art history. So I definitely think if you
Awesome.
get into a um kind of very, what's the word I'm looking for, like a not elite but selective program, it's always, I think
Hmm.
you're going to find that like you realize, some people do realize like, oh, this is not what I thought it was, I don't want to do this.
Oh, 100%. Like, not to get into my life, but again, yeah, it was kind of the same in my master's program. I think there was just the first week, there was this like one guy, I think he was English, which is like the only thing I remember about him. But we did all these introductions and orientations, and then like I think he might have been there week 2. Week 3, everyone was like, oh, wasn't that? Because it was like 36 of us.
Hmm.
None of us could remember each other's names at that point, except me. And I was like, oh, wasn't there that other guy? Like, because there wasn't many guys in the
Hmm.
course. So it was just like, shouldn't there be like another man in the room? No, he doesn't exist. Okay,
Right.
cool. He just decided it wasn't for him. Never came back. We never saw him again.
And you know what, valid, valid, it's okay.
Totally valid. If you don't want to do it, don't waste your
I think
time.
especially
Don't
too,
waste other people's time.
right, with Adams, something like that as well. Like when you're 14 and you make this choice, you go to this art
Mhm.
school, 14-year-olds be making decisions and then they're like, never mind. So
Mhm.
I'm sure that like people drop out after the first
Yes.
year.
Yeah. And it could have been someone quite well off as well, where their parents were probably like, "Oh, we can get you into like this school instead," or
Right.
like, "We're moving to California or something." And, so many things could have happened. The amount of people, you think back to the first year of high school, you think about the people in your class who then moved away and you just never saw them
Yeah.
again. It's weird.
And I mean, yeah, you said like people who are wealthy that can just jump schools. I mean, look at Charlie. Like, what did he do? He went to a
Hmm.
different, selective, expensive school. So
Yep.
it's very easy in the kind of private school sector to just jump around. So, yes, we have Jack and Eric immediately jumping in. They're arguing about whatever the drama is. And the drama is that the techies, there's a techie event that happens every year, and the sophomores and up get to go. And as you know, the sophomore class, this should be their first year to get to do this kind of rite of passage thing. And no, they can't go because there's a performer showcase on the same day to kind of recruit at the middle schools. And I wrote in my notes that I think one reason I don't like this episode is because it gives me war flashbacks to when I was in choir and theater in high school, and we would go to like the elementary schools to recruit kids to like do choir, do theater. And the thing is, like, it was just so embarrassing. Like, I was like, I don't want to be singing in front of these like 12-year-olds who are like judging us because we're like the geeky
Yeah.
art kids. It's awful. It's so horrible. I think that the Adams kids would have less self consciousness about that because they're already insane. But just the whole
Yeah.
idea of that is like it's already terrible. So maybe that's partially why I'm like, I don't want to think about this.
I definitely feel that. I mean, we kind of had similar things. We never really had like focused programs or anything, but I definitely remember going to even just like big meetups with all the primary schools would go to one school and like all sing together, and it was just
Yes.
just quite awkward.
Yeah, we had something similar to that too. So I will say there is a little source material reference in here. The middle school that they
Yep.
mentioned, JQA, John Quincy Adams, is the middle school in Girl Meets World. So, woohoo. So many shout outs in season one, and then shout outs like go away, but there's one for the people out there. There's a line here, an exchange, that I think is one of my favorite lines in the episode and also is just funny to the kind of show. Is Eric says, "I'm just saying, don't say I didn't warn you. The school's going to be hell this week because of it." And Jack goes, "You say that as if the school is in hell every week."
And that's true. Yeah.
That's all that
Um,
tension is the school being hell every week.
it's just hell because everyone is just it's like they're in purgatory.
Yeah, ooh, there's a someone's got a fan theory that.
Oh,
Like you
actually,
know
that's
that
a good
all
one.
those
We'll have to
weird
have a look.
fan theories about like
Yeah, like Winnie the
or
Pooh and like
Rugrats or yeah.
yeah,
Ambition is purgatory. Yeah. Someone
that's
get
a good
on it.
one.
Write the theory.
I thought it was I think it's like the next scene when Lucas and
Lucas and Issa. Yeah.
Issa are just like, no, kind of to Sean, and it's kind of just it's a lot of energy for them. It's quite weird. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I know that Lucas wasn't in his like super emo era at this point, but it's a lot. Like he just really seemed to care, And I'm just like, oh,
Yes. I wrote in my note, it's kind of cute how Lucas seems to care about something.
yeah.
But I think I was thinking about this, and I think it's mainly because, Lucas has that line, one of his quintessential lines of, when I care about something, you'll know.
Mm-hmm.
And he also has a line in 109, the Les Mis episode,
Mm.
where when he's given the responsibility of being stage manager, Jack says, "Can I trust you with this, or are you going to fuck it up?" without saying fuck it up. And Lucas's response, we'll talk about this when we get there, but his response is basically like, I may not care about it, but I know my crew cares about it and I care about my crew. Therefore, I
Oh,
will take it seriously.
yeah.
And I think that's what you're seeing right here is
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't really give a shit about this thing. He's like, I don't care about traditions. I don't care about rite of passage, whatever, but Issa cares so much about it, and the techies care so much about it, that he's mad on their behalf more than I'm invested in this.
That is so sweet, and that is why we love him.
Like I wrote on this on my notes, I kind of said Lucador is a serve. I will
Yeah.
say, like I think that they're very strong in this episode, and I think you see it at the end of this scene what Lucas actually cares about, because he's like, Sean's like, you know which side gets the favor, I'm doing the best I can, and what is Lucas's last line? What about Dora's film? That's what
Oh,
he actually cares about, is the fact that
yeah.
she's missing this opportunity.
Like he's had to sit there listening to her rant about it for, you know, a month or two at this point, and
Mm-hmm.
now she doesn't even get to do it. So that was a waste
Yep.
of him having to listen. No, just kidding.
Well, maybe he feels like that a little bit,
Maybe a
but
little, but also he cares a lot.
it's also like, I think, to be fair, like when Jack was earlier saying, oh, first let me say, I thought it was kind of like eyebrow raised that Jack called Eric Matthews, like he called him by his last name. I was like, they're on last name basis. These bitches really
Mm,
don't like each other.
that's just
But
weird.
I know it's like you think about later, like how softly he says Eric, and it's like,
Yeah.
nope, we're not there right now.
Mm-mm.
Not at
Different
all.
universe.
But basically, Jack says, like, this is the situation, like, we have to do this thing, we need technicians at that, they are the people who need this experience the most, they're the logical ones to send. And the thing is, I think Jack is right, like, he's not wrong, that is the logical decision, and they will get to go next year, it's not like they never get to go to this thing, but I understand why the techies are so upset too, because when you're 15, everything's the end of the world.
It's true. And it really does feel like everything is just like that is the only year that exists. Like
Yeah.
you can't you can't put it in perspective at all. So I think they're a bit valid, as valid as they can be for 15-year-olds.
Right. Exactly. So then we jump into this first performance, first song of the episode, which
Yeah.
is Thriller Heads Will Roll mashup, as originally performed by Glee Cast. Glee Cast shout out. Let's go, Gleeks. I think there's really, I mean, there's always a little bit of Glee Cast peppered throughout the show, because one reason we pick Glee Cast a lot is, I mean, Esther always puts a little like pin on it where she's like, Maggie, you can only have this many Glee songs in like a
Mhm.
season, and
Good.
that's valid. For me though, I think one reason I often will go with a version of a Glee song rather than the original is because of the fact that it does lend a sense of like, it sounds like young
Yes.
people singing it. It sounds like a crop of teenagers singing it. And
Yeah.
that's kind of like, we want to pick songs that the version of it feels most like what you're hearing or would be hearing in the show.
Yeah.
And this one I enjoy because I this is one of my favorite Glee performances, honestly. I
Oh
like the
yeah.
mashup. I think
Mhm.
it's fun.
It was a good episode. Anyway, we don't need to go into Glee episodes, but it was
Glee
memorable.
recap. That'll be our next podcast is Glee.
Sure.
Oh god.
No.
But yeah, I mean that's why like that this one was chosen for this, and I think it's a fun song. I think this is what like the longest description of a performance in this episode as well.
Yes. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, there's a couple in this one that get more than 2 paragraphs, I think,
Ooh,
potentially.
we're building it up here.
Whoa.
We're
Um,
really
I
going for it.
I thought it was really interesting how Lucas is like he never sings, he never like performs, but actually first episode of the second first performance of the second episode ever, he
Hmm.
does do the talking part in the song, which is kind of performance-ish, and
Yes.
that's significant.
Yeah, I think his little contribution there I think is funny because I think what we get the sense of from the description is that he literally is just doing the talking and kind of weaving throughout people while the other techies are like actually doing the shit that's annoying the performers. So
Hmm.
they're kind of like more involved in a choreography sense of it, whereas Lucas is just sauntering his way around, like being annoying. But yeah, and I think it's very clear, it's very important that it's like he's talking, he's not singing.
Yeah.
But I would just love to see it because the dissonance of like Lucas just speaking while they're
Yeah.
like actually trying to perform is like so funny to me in the way I can see it in my head. And I love this idea of like Maya with that what was Naya Rivera in the original track singing the off with your head part, like her really trying to like get this back on track, like shut
Mhm.
up, Lucas James Fryer, I'm trying to do this performance, and he's just like, I'm just making my way downtown, like walking fast, faces past, I'm homebound. He's so unbothered.
Truly a powerhouse, more so than Maya ever can be. Maybe, maybe not. No.
I would really like to see, in terms of this performance, the thing I wish I could see is the techie jump, where they all jump off the edge of the stage at that one point when it
Yeah.
gets really quiet. I wish I could see that because I think it would be fun.
Yeah, I mean, this does have like this episode does have some kind of, I mean, it's very, yeah, it's very sitcom vibes, but the performances have these like sort of more funny elements, which is quite fun.
Hmm. Yes, I do agree about that. It's funny too. I talked about how I hate recruitment, but I was wondering too, like if they're practicing for this, like I wonder if anybody in the A class like was a recruitment. Like, did they see this weird school come to their middle school, and then they were like, "Ooh, damn, I want to go there." Like, I could see like Dave doing that if he like has never
Yeah,
heard of this school and has no impression of anything, and then these weirdo 10th graders come to his school and like do a weird number, and he's like, "That was pretty cool.
yeah.
I want to go to that
He just
school."
like makes the decision in his like empty brain, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna go there." And everyone's
Yeah.
like, "Okay, it's like an elite school, Mr. What's his last name?
Williams.
It's an elite school, Mr. Williams. Like, you might not get in." They're like, "Don't get your hopes up, Dave. Like, you cutie." And he's like, "It's okay, I'm gonna go." And then he gets in, and everyone's like, "Oh, okay, cool.
There he goes. He did it. Look at him go.
Look at him go."
Yeah. It's so. I was just like, because I know when I would see those things when I was in elementary school, I was like, I don't care about this. So it's like, I wonder who changes their mind when they
Mm,
see this weird thriller heads will roll performance. Then at the end of the performance here, we have Farkle getting all pissed off, and he goes, "I want all of them expelled." And I just
yeah,
think he is so stupid funny because
yeah.
he's so ridiculous.
I wrote in my notes that his mania is like off the charts there. He's like,
Yes.
it's like, who do you think you are, Farkle?
I think, like, honestly, talking kind of more seriously about, like, where is his bipolar disorder at
Mm,
this point, I do think for a lot of season one, he's in a manic episode. Like, he's
yes.
very much in that vibe. And it's not until about, I would say, 110, 111 that
Mhm,
and we will talk about this when we get there because like, there are moments where it's kind of distinctly pointing to that, where he does slip into more depressive. So I think
mhm.
it's kind of interesting that it is so manic right now.
Yeah.
It's like every line he has in this episode is like capitalized.
Yes, exactly.
So yes, the techies, they've ruined the performance.
I did.
Maya's upset. The performers are upset, and Maya
Everyone is tense.
explains, yes, everyone's tense, and Maya explains that the reason this is so important is because God, Mr. Jacobs is going to be there on Friday night, and she doesn't want to embarrass herself. Now, let me just say, not me making a reference to Michael Jacobs. Again, it's like at the time,
It really
funny,
was,
chill.
yeah. Hmm.
Now I'm like, God. But, he does have a little bit of a purpose at the end of the season because we go to the Jacobs Gala and that's like a
Hmm.
whole thing. So I'm glad that I like actually gave a reason for his existence, which Zay explains of him being like he's on the admissions panel for Juilliard.
Mm,
It's never a bad idea to get on his radar. And so I'm glad that there's like a reason for that.
mm.
It's not just me being like, let me throw this in there, and there being like no reason. I'm glad that it's able to come back later and kind of make sense.
Yeah.
But generally, I look at this and I'm like, okay.
Yes.
Again, it was a different era.
Mm,
But I will
really
say,
was.
it's a little bit of poetic justice that Riley gets to be like, who? To
Hmm.
Michael Jacobs?
Yes.
Drag him. And then it's funny that I think it's very in character that Maya says that and Farkle squawks and has like a mini mental breakdown. And then Zay is helpful and explains things. That's kind of the three of them in a nutshell. And she has a great line here that I like to the techies where she goes, "So kindly, if you all could stop ruining everything, much appreciated." Mwah.
Yes, so funny.
That's a
Mwah.
very her line.
Yeah. Mwah. Flips her hair.
Flips hair, walks away. Then we go to a film studies class. I wrote to myself, I wonder what happened to the film studies class, because we never see it again after this
Yeah.
episode. And I also am obsessed with Dylan and Yogi and Dave in this little moment here,
Yeah.
where Dylan is classically passed out because a movie is playing, and Yogi and Dave are trying to pick on him by sticking markers together to make it long enough to poke his ear. Very
So cute.
techie boy antics. Very for them. I think it makes complete sense that Yogi would be in a film studies class. No
Yes.
question about that. And then I think, okay, Dave is probably in the film studies class because Yogi is in the film studies class.
Yeah.
But then I'm like, why is Dylan in film studies class when he knows he falls asleep when he watches movies?
Maybe he was like, oh, like, yeah, I'll sign up too. And then he was just like, I can catch up on my naps then.
Yeah, he's like, let me build in a little nap during the day by
Yeah.
going to film studies class.
And then Issa is just devious. Yeah.
Yes, Issa's bummed because isn't going to get to go to the thing and she wasted all this time on her short film idea. And then, as they're watching this horror film, she seems to get an idea.
Oh.
And she goes into the hallway after class and, like, mauls Lucas and, like, shoves him into the corridor, which I wrote in my notes. Lucas just straight up casually getting manhandled. That's how we do things around here. But I think it's a very interesting just kind of display as well of what their friendship is like, because we still don't know a lot about them. And I think this is an episode where we really do get a lot of their dynamic and them as individuals.
Yes.
Starting to get a better sense of that. And I think it is they just have such a unique sibling-like dynamic of like, oh, I found you in the hallway. Come over here. I need to talk to you.
Yeah.
And you know that Issa is like the only person that could get away with that.
Definitely. Like the only other person would be like maybe Dylan.
Like Dylan would also like not
Yeah.
right. Dylan would not do that. Like he would be like, Lucas, my best friend, and like hug him, but he would not be like, follow me, I need you to come with me, and like drag him around. But that's just very Issa. And I like this kind of also credence to their dynamic at this point of when she explains what her idea is and what she wants to do. I highlighted the line, she should have led with revenge. Because the moment she says they're getting their revenge, Lucas is like, oh, okay, sure, go on.
Yeah, he's like skeptic, cynic, and then he's like, oh, I'm on board.
Then we have a little scene here with Angela and Sean basically arguing about what's going on in Jack's office, and Jack is basically like watching couples therapy, and he's like, I don't want to deal with this, so I have important things to do, could you get the hell out? And they continue their fight in the hallway and continue to yell at each other, and we realize that it's because they have a history together that goes beyond working at the school.
Yes. And I gotta say, I was a big Sean and Angela fan back in those season 1 days. And this was like a bit of fun for me at the time. But now, I gotta say, I do read it a little bit and just go, we really just like did love some expositions back then. Like we just really just wrote it down. And
here's your backstory.
Yep. There you go.
I think their romance in season 1 serves a purpose, you know, and it's nice that it does continue to pop up a little bit in the later seasons because it's just a continuity element, but I think that they do not fit the same mold that all of the other romantic relationships in this show do.
No, it's so different.
So it's kind of, I think it is, again, like they are a relic of this time.
That's true. And wasn't it that you kind of planned season 2 and you're like, oh, what are Sean and Angela going to do in season 1? Well, I guess we'll like have them get together.
Well, it was more like because so Sean and Angela, for a big part of it, I was kind of giving them justice for the fact that they deserved to be endgame and they weren't. So it was like, I'm going to make them endgame in my story. So that was kind of part of it. But I think it's also like, I mean, as we know with season 2, I think we didn't really know yet what Angela's story for her own arc was going to be in season 1. And then season 2, it was just so much more interesting and fresh to bring in a new teacher, Harper, who does not have that dynamic with Sean and doesn't have that, like, you know, I wanted to explore, like, what happens when you put an actual teacher in there that is going to have friction with him in an instructional way, you know? So it was just kind of, like, about exploring the different kind of dynamics.
Hmm.
So
I love that.
I will say that Angela and Sean in their like individual stories are usually more like afterthoughts. Like there's something that is kind of like set dressing
Yeah.
on the rest of the main writing that we do at the beginning.
And that's fine. That is all good. It's all setting up. That's the hard thing when I tell people to read Ambition. I'm like, so I feel like I was very into it straight away, but it was like more casual as well.
Mm-hmm.
And now knowing how much is ahead of them can be intimidating for people, but I always want to promise them that it's like it only gets better and better.
Right. And it kind of eases into
Mm.
the intensity and
You
getting
just
really
have to
long.
get past Sean and Angela yelling and Jack and Eric yelling and Farkle and Maya yelling and Topanga and
And
Cory
yelling.
yelling.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, that's why I always hope that people will get to like, if people can make it again to episode 7, they'll figure it out. And then like, yeah, I like,
honestly,
again, this is my least favorite episode. So if you can get past this,
yeah,
it's like there's hope.
heck yeah. Especially because I even think like episode 5, but
Yes. I mean, episode 5, we'll talk about that when we get there because it is also kind of, there's things I think are so important, but I also think it's like kind of weird. So
yeah,
we'll get to that when we get to that.
we sure will.
So we have the techies having their first little
Exactly.
brainstorm that we
Mm-hmm.
see with their whiteboard. Very
Good for
much,
them.
yes, I think that comes to be
A thing.
very important. I will say, I thought that Sean, in his arguments with Angela, I thought it was impressive, and maybe he deserves some credit that he is able to adequately defend his students. Like when she's like, your students don't even do assignments, and then he's like, that's not their job. Like he knows enough to be like, I can take care of my crew. And then after that, he's like, I
Right.
don't know
Yeah.
anything.
He knows the basic points and he can make them.
Right, exactly. So yes, we have Issa trying to rope the rest of the techies into this idea that she has about making a mockumentary about the ghost of Adams, which cues Dylan to go, there's a ghost? And Isadora goes, no, it's a mucket. Could I finish? So I think that that is a kind of really fun little moment of their friendship.
Mm.
That it's like clearly Dylan is invested in what she has to say, but he like cannot help himself from like outbursting in the middle. And
Honestly, same.
Issa doesn't get upset with that. She's just like, could you hold on? Just hold for 1 second. Let me finish my sentence.
It reminds me of me and Ellie's dynamic. Sometimes because I'll be like the annoying sister who's like, I know this is a dumb joke, but I just have to say it. And she's like, Maddie, stop. Okay. Anyway, let me continue with my story.
Right. I mean, I think Ellie is INTJ, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
Issa is INTJ. So,
Yes,
there you go.
it makes sense.
So the techies decide that they are going to make this mockumentary that's going to talk about this ghost, and they're going to convince the performers that there really is one by scaring the shit out of them by using the tech prowess that they have. And I will
Yeah.
say, I think that that is, again, a really interesting idea. Like, I like the idea of, like, using techie stuff to, like, prove something else and, like, using their skills in a different way. I think that's cool. Again, like, is it a great plot for this show? Meh.
Mm-hmm.
But I do like that, the concept of that.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fun idea. It's very, it was a time. Anyway.
There's this exchange here that, of course, I have to say, it is the Crocodile
Mm-hmm.
Exchange.
Yes.
And for fans of the show, they will know what we're talking about. This is a joke that somehow then became like a recurring joke where we always are talking about this guy with the crocodile. He's got the croc download.
Mm-hmm.
But so they're deciding, what are they going to do? We need ideas. And Dave eagerly raises his hand. No one else is raising their hand, but he's raising his hand to be called on. And Lucas gives him the floor. He says, what say you, Dave?
Which is hilarious.
That Lucas and his choice with words again. So Dave goes, okay. So here's an idea. We get a pair of crocodiles. And then I think that Lucas and Issa's individual interactions, like responses to that, are hilarious because Issa gets a little frustrated and is like pinching the bridge of her nose, just being as patient as she can. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
Lucas, at Dave's suggestion, just raises his eyebrows but doesn't seem upset about it. He's like, oh, go on. I
Okay.
want to hear what you have to say, Dave Williams.
It's possibility.
And I think that it really goes to show there's this really lovely relationship that Lucas and Dave have,
Mm-hmm.
where I think Lucas is truly genuinely fond of Dave. And when he says weird things like this or has his weird moments, like, we tend to show Lucas being amused or like smiling at it. And we know that Lucas is not easy to make smile. So I think it's just very sweet that like Dave can be so oblivious in himself, and that endears Lucas to him. Like, Lucas is like, ah, yes, it's my Davy.
So cute. I wrote down here that, where is it? The techies are being very dramatic considering their anti-performance.
with their song.
Yeah, with their song, exactly.
Yes, that brings us into the second performance here, which is This Is Halloween. Sean having decided he will support their antics, which I think he is so immature, but
Yeah.
it's kind of funny. I will give S credit where this is due. This was a performance that was very much her brain baby. She did not write the actual outline of it, but she did the lyrics for it. And she just like kind of had the whole concept of it. And so I remember when I was writing this episode, I was like, how do you want me to write this? And she was like, it's like this. And then I was like, okay. And then I went and just transcribed it basically, which was what a lot of our conversations in season 1 were like. I will say my favorite little element of this performance is 2 things. I love the Jade shout out of us specifically focusing on Jade costuming Issa, because I think it's like, look at her skills, look at my girl. And then I love the lyric change of our girl Smack is queen of the pumpkin patch. We never call her Smackle anymore, but that use of it there, I'm like, really smart, writers.
Yeah. Like right sort of at the start, it did end up having like quite a big moment in a couple of episodes' time. So it does make sense that it is brought in before that.
Yes. So yeah, that was, I mean, it's a fine performance. It's okay. The song is fun. Nightmare Before Christmas is fun.
I
Is
wrote
it
a note
amazing?
that um Lucas has just like again the different vibes being like in on this performance, but also just the fact that he scares Farkle is like very early Lucas and Farkle, and I love
Yes.
that that is shown here.
Yes, when they go to class and they're now doing their thing and they're pretending like Issa's filming this documentary and getting B-roll while they're performing. I thought it was funny. I noted as well, like, that when they're upset about this, Farkle's the one that's like, why are they filming? They shouldn't be
Mm,
filming. And I'm like, it is so Farkle to be like, no paparazzi.
yeah.
Like, he
Hey,
is
excuse
so
me.
insane.
You need to pay your rights to get
Yeah.
this based on film.
But yes, I thought it was also very like the image of everyone being like, whoa, a ghost? And then Farkle being like, there's no such thing as ghost. Goes into long dramatic explanation of why that's not the case. And just the idea of like 14-year-old baby Farkle like talking his ass off at like all these other performers who do not care. And I think that Lucas being the one to interrupt him by just like scaring the shit out of him is
Oh,
so
it's
and he
slapstick
does this
comedy.
he does this later too. He does this in episode 3 as well.
Mm,
And we'll talk about that when we get there. But it is very clearly like you can see the shades of what their relationship was like before the show started.
mhm,
Of this is a little bit lore, but I will say we will see this later too. In later seasons when they reflect on the past. That and Farkle references this in a couple lines in season 2 and season 3 about he was very antagonistic to Lucas and was always riling him up and was always trying to get him to like I don't even know, like,
mm.
chase him around. Like, he was being very, like,
He
I mean,
wanted
he's,
him to like chase him around and then I guess like pin him down or something.
I mean,
There's
Farkle,
something wrapped up in that.
yes, he's very psychologically, we know he has issues, but we've said this a lot as a joke that he has a fear kink. And I think that he definitely was crushing on Lucas in freshman year, and so he liked the attention from the only way he could get attention from him was annoying him and making him mad. And I think that dynamic has mellowed somewhat because Lucas is
Mhm.
clearly not chasing him around the auditorium anymore.
No, who has
But
energy for that? No one.
right, he's very much still like, if I have the opportunity, I'm gonna jump scare him.
Yeah.
And
And
I
it's
think
kind of
that,
fun. I love
yeah,
that for Lucas. Like, he really gets so down and out sometimes, and it's so nice to think of him like doing funny stuff.
yes, I think that it really is a demonstration of like, there is a moment of Lucas being a 16-year-old boy
Yeah, I love that.
rather than like, the grump that he is.
Someone else.
So then we get into this conversation about our ghost reel. And this exchange here, I would say, is one of the legacy lines of Ambition,
I think
which is
so.
that Charlie says, Farkle's loud but right. If ghosts were real, my devout Catholic grandmother would still be tucking in my shirts and telling me I'm going to hell for missing Mass on Sundays for rehearsals. And Dylan Orlando says the line, I'm going to hell too, but that's not why.
So good.
That is just it's no longer his first ever line, because when we revamped the pilot, he has lines in the pilot. It
Yeah.
used to be his first line, and it was just, I just love it. I think everybody loves it. It's like this little I put stars in my notes this time. That is a
Oh,
star moment for me, of like, this is a legacy Ambition moment.
it's true. I also summarized it in my notes as Charlie, I'm religious. Dylan, I'm gay. And that is the entire like thing
Yes,
summarized.
yes, I love it. It's true. I think it's, again, there's also later jokes. I think it shows this really interesting thing of the way that Dylan perceives things.
Yeah.
Because, even if you're like, people joke about going to hell or whatever, but like, he says later at some point, like, Lucas says something about, this is in season 2, and Lucas says something about like, oh, well, like, well, I'm gonna be stuck in hell or whatever, this is hell. And Dylan says, like, you say that if it's a bad thing? It's
Yeah.
like, Dylan, what are you talking about?
He
But I
has
just
such
love
an
it. Like, I love
interesting
his,
view.
yes,
He's
I love his
clearly done that.
weird,
It's almost like there's this like parallel universe where Dylan is like a Satanist or something, and he like does occult magic or something, and he's just like
well,
really
he
into
does,
going to hell.
he has that line of, in this one, I do remember what episode it's in, which I believe is 207. It's 204 or 207, but, or maybe it's 205. Okay, I don't remember what episode it's in, but it's in the middle of season 2, where Lucas is like, E says, I think it is 204 because they're talking about Thanksgiving, and he's like, Issa's hanging out with her performer cult, so whatever. And then Dylan's like, there's a cult? And Asher's like, no, don't worry about it. And Dylan's like, I'm not worried. I thought we were going to start one first. So
Yes.
it's like, he's just so weird.
This is like an untapped side of Dylan. So good. Like, what is he gonna get up to when he goes to uni? I feel like he's just gonna join like a really culty club, and Ash is gonna be like, hear one of the meetings, and he's gonna be like, Dylan, you're never going back to that club. I can already see where this is going.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I have a friend who has an interest in stuff like that, but is very self-assured and is not going to get sucked into it. But like, he's gone to like Scientology meetings and stuff like that, just to like see what
Oh,
it's like. And I feel like Dylan would be like that, or he'd be like, I'm just gonna
yeah.
go check, I'm gonna have a
I'm
Scientologist
just
on my
gonna,
show
and they're
just
like,
to see what they
oh,
say. And Asher's
okay.
like, you can't do this, like, you
They
need
know.
to stop.
Yeah, he just meets people. He's like, oh, so I was talking to this guy, and he's like in this club where they just like, sacrifice animals and stuff. Anyway, so it was really interesting what he had to say. And Ash is just sitting there like, um, what?
Again, I think there
Where?
was some line or Asher has said at one point, like, every day it's amazing that like you're alive or whatever. And I think it's partially just because that's Dylan for you.
hmm
But yes, legacy line, big important moment of Ambition. Then they continue to talk about it. They're going about, are ghosts real? Are they a Christian thing? Are they, and Farkle's and they're like, ghosts aren't anything. They don't exist. And I think he's so funny. I just have this very clear image of my head in where Yogi goes, tell that to the elderly man who lives in my apartment and moves our furniture when we're not there. And I just have this so clear image of like the reaction shot of everybody staring at him after he says that. Like, the concern on Charlie's face of, like, did
Yeah.
he just tell us that he has a squatter living in his apartment? Is someone gonna check on this? Like, that's exactly the sort of thing that Charlie would be like, oh my,
Like Charlie
what?
like goes to Eric after this and is like, I think you need to like check on like Yogi's family. Like, is he okay?
Yes. And he 100% would. We know
Yeah,
that
he
he
would.
would.
He's like, it's his Catholic duty to I don't even know. I don't know anything about Catholicism, but I thought it was very hilarious that Asher and Dave high-fived after Dylan says his iconic line because they're just so like the opposite ends of Dylan's friendships and relationships.
Hmm.
And Asher's so small and Dave is so tall, and it would be another addition to the whole slapstick of this scene.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because their height difference. I guess for the folks out there, I imagine that Asher is somewhat on the shorter side. He's 5'6", and in this episode, actually, since he's still, I guess he's probably turned 15 at this point, but he's one of the babies, so he's still pretty young. I would imagine he's probably more like 5'4", 5'5" right now because he's
Hmm.
just barely 15. His final height is like 5'6". But Dave is like a giant. Like, he's like over 6 feet. He's probably like 6'3", 6'4" by the end of their growth when they're like, season 3 or whatever.
Hmm.
And the way I always pictured this scene for me was like, I don't know if we've ever really talked about what I imagine the stage is typically like, but usually there's always some remnants of like a set piece that was built or is being taken down. Like, there's always some things that are kind of going on the
Hmm.
stage. And there's always acting blocks, which are just like, for those that don't know, are just like literally painted black boxes that they're sturdy enough that you can stand on them. That's their
Hmm.
purpose. But there's always a few of those stacked around. So when I imagine them high fiving, it's like Asher is sitting on a stack of acting blocks and Dave is like kind of his elbows on it. So yeah, it's like that height difference
Yes.
is there, but they're at the same height because Asher is perched. And that's another kind of weird little character quirk that I love is I do often imagine Asher sitting like that, where he, in his bird bones fashion, will like perch on things. Like,
Aw,
he's on the table in the booth, he's
yeah.
on acting blocks, he's always kind of like just ready to take flight in a way, but he is often sitting like that.
And I feel like Dylan is kind of like not in the same way, often sitting on things, but just because of his ADHD, and he's like, I'm gonna climb this. And so that's almost like a little like bonding thing, but it's more like Asher's like, I need to like be able to see everyone and like sit away from people and just like
Mm-hmm.
be alone and like know where things are. And Dylan is
Yes.
just the opposite, just being like, this is so cool. I'm up here.
Yes, Dylan's like, I have to sit weird and climb things because I'm gay.
Yeah.
I can't sit normally. But yeah, I think I have said at some point too that I definitely imagine, like, if we are seeing more of Dylan and Asher in the background of stuff, like, I mean, they're dating, they're very comfortable with each other. Dylan is very touchy feely anyway. I've always imagined, like, you could definitely see them at times, like, just climbing over each other, like,
Yes.
very much, like, in a very, we're clearly very comfortable way, and in that same kind of thing of them both having those quirks. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. And I can see them like sitting on things in the background and just being cute. Anyway, moving on.
Moving on. So we have another Riley, after that weird class. Riley goes to talk to Eric and they chat about how things are going. And she kind of just gets another like little update from him about like, here's a little more exposition about things.
Hmm.
Um,
He's basically saying, so Sean and Angela suck, and they're the reason that everything sucks, basically.
and yeah, he has this kind of insight of, circumstances and people's different perspectives is going to make people clash because they're going to have different points of view. I think that that is an interesting insight, and I think it is
Mm.
true for a lot of the stuff that we explore on the show is just, people coming from different places.
Yeah.
And we get kind of an insight into that as we jump into what I think is one of the more interesting scenes of the episode, which is getting a glimpse at Issa's foster home life,
Mm.
which is, it's, not, I think there's this kind of stereotype of the idea of being a foster kid is like you're poor and you don't get enough or whatever. And like, that's clearly not the case for her here. She's in a very well-off family's home.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that it's still like when you've got, I think there's like 8 siblings in this foster home.
I think you
So
said
it's
it was
like,
like 10 or 12.
it's quite a lot. I honestly don't even remember all of their names or anything anymore. One of the only tidbits I remember is that there were 2 12-year-olds in the house, and both of
Mm.
them, one boy, one girl, had crushes on Lucas, which I thought was funny. Issa's like, could everybody stop having a crush on you because you're not cute and you're not funny and you're not interesting? And Lucas is like, I know. Why are you complaining to me about it? So yes, we just see this kind of glimpse of Issa existing in this space, but clearly not like being super comfortable in it. But I do like that I think we get a lot of just a vibe of Lucas and Isadora from watching them in
Yeah.
this scene, where they're just hanging out in her little corner of the room that she shares, and they seem very comfortable with each other, which I think it's interesting to see Lucas more comfortable in a way,
Mm.
like where he's more relaxed.
Yeah, it's like
And
we get a real glimpse at his character.
yeah, the way he's kind of disinterestedly but also amusedly watching everything, and he doesn't really
Mm.
comment, but he's just observing. And he has this interesting moment to Issa where I think this is a great moment of like early on, not necessarily exposition-y writing, but more of a showing versus telling of
Yeah.
when Lucas asks like, "Oh, so this one's going okay," which kind of implies like this is not Issa's first foster home. Issa has been here for a while, and it's not awful, but clearly Issa doesn't want to talk about it. So I think
Yeah.
it's like all of that is just said in like the idea of 2 lines, and I
Yeah.
think that that is more. There's just so much more intrigue to that.
Definitely. There's just a lot happening in these scenes, and it feels it I mean, I'm honestly glad to be rereading because this whole like foster kid side of Issa is something that is really very season 1 in a way because
Mm-hmm.
it's really like something that doesn't seem like I don't think about that as part of her character anymore, I would say.
Yeah,
So,
because she's outgrown it. Because it's she's moved on to a different, more stable
mm,
version of her life. But there are definitely still elements of like characters that we see, like Blue and
mm,
some of the other siblings that we continue to see. But yeah, it is definitely like a relic of season 1 and early season 2. I also think it's interesting too that no, it's not really interesting. It's funny. I think it's hilarious that Karen, the foster mother, is like so terrified of Lucas. Like he's literally just sitting there, not talking, not causing trouble, and she's still like, I don't trust that. And
mm.
maybe that's valid.
He's like, this kid, he just smells like trouble. Don't know why,
He's
don't know
gonna
how.
steal my brass candlesticks. I just know it.
And he's like, what on earth would I want with some brass candles?
Like he is a klepto, but it's not that bad yet. We're not at him stealing Farkle's silverware in season 2. So, yeah. Then we get into a scene here with the Minkuses. We are seeing all of Farkle's family for the first time. I think this is a really interesting scene. I think this is one of my favorites in the episode actually because I think it reveals again, this is a scene for example that I would keep if I
Hmm.
moved it to a different episode
Yeah.
because I think it's very telling to see how his family interacts and how he is this black sheep middle child who is trying to get a word in and is trying to start a conversation and be noticed and kind of failing in that effort constantly and almost making an ass out of himself as he's trying to do that. And I think that it really gives you some insight into why he is the way he is at school
Yeah.
is because he's doing this at home. There's a line that I love here, just the way I imagine Farkle delivering it, where they're like, "Oh, ghosts? Why are you talking about ghosts? Ha ha ha! We're a science family. We don't believe in ghosts." And so his little brother is like, "Ghosts? Are they real?" And Jennifer's like, "Of course not, dear. Farkle's just being silly, aren't you, darling?" And
Hmm.
Farkle was like, "Oh, that's me. I'm as silly as they come."
Yes.
And just the idea of him just being so flat is like, you can just tell his personality is really all over the place.
Oh, yeah. Because that's the whole thing is like he actually is quite silly. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but also he's like entirely serious all the time.
Yeah. He makes trouble accidentally because well, I guess the question is like, is it an accident where he spills water and makes a mess and that
Mm,
causes everybody to react to that. I highlighted the exchange that he has with his older sister Lila here
Mm.
because this is another moment of I can tell where this is influenced by something. She says to him, "Why are you such a disease?" And then he
Mm-hmm.
like chews pointedly at her, which I think his reaction is hilarious. But that line of "Why are you such a disease" is in Home Alone, which is one of
Uh-huh.
my favorite movies. One of the Kevin's older brothers goes, "Kevin, you're such a disease,"
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's like you can so see like that was obviously in my head when I was writing this.
It definitely has that like 90s movie, 90s Disney kind of sibling vibe for sure.
Yes. Then we get this really sad moment of Farkle being like, "I have this performance. Is anyone gonna come?" And the whole family's like, "I can't. Sorry,
Bye.
but good luck." And I think that that's setting us up for a lot of the stuff that we'll be exploring with the mink guy.
Yes.
I will pause here to incorporate a question that we have
Ooh.
gotten from one of our listeners.
Mm.
So this is a question that was submitted by advanced pronunciation, or if I pronounce anything wrong, like any of our listeners, if I ever say your name or your username or anything, apologies in advance. I am so terrible about pronouncing names. So big apologies. But I believe it's Raban Art. She's a great ambition fan, and she's made fan art. Check out her Instagram. So she messaged me about this, and she was wondering what the process was for casting the families and creating those characters, because she said especially the mink guy and the gardeners, because their casting is so perfect, which thank you for the
Great
compliment.
question.
I love casting. I will say, even though it's obviously fake, I really like the idea of trying to find actors and actresses and sometimes, model actresses, whatever, that look alike, because I like that almost little puzzle of
Hmm.
how can I make it seem like these people would actually be related.
Yeah.
Um, and I think to my credit, not to be pretentious, but I think I'm a little good at it. It's
Nice.
a hobby. I
Mhm.
will save talking about the gardeners for when we actually meet them more specifically in a later episode this season. But with the mink guy, I think also there's also the caveat talking about here that like almost all of the characters that are family members are original characters that we made up. They're not tied to the original source material in any way. So with the exception of Jennifer and Stuart, who already existed, a lot of the siblings we just knew like I think we start with kind of like archetypes of like what are the roles that we need in the family dynamic. So with the mink guy, it's like we wanted Farkle to be that middle child. So he had to have three older siblings and then two or three younger siblings. And with the older siblings, I wanted to have one that was the golden child who Farkle looks up to and is clearly like got everything figured out and is like what you want to be, and that's Ezekiel, who we meet later. And then I wanted there to be a older sister who is stuck in this family of men who also are like a business family of men and just like that role of feeling like how do I fit in this family. And I think it's very interesting that Lila and Farkle both feel that way, but they antagonize each other. And I think it's because that they're in the middle, like they're both the ones in the middle, and there's such a thing of like we're close to each other in age, so we're either going to bond together or we're going to go on the offense towards each other. And so I think we see that a lot in season 1, and then it changes a little bit in season 2. But with casting them, oh, and then I will say Yuri was the other kind of archetype that we wanted, aside from like Ezra's the little one, and we wanted someone who clearly his role is kind of like someone who clearly idolizes Farkle, no strings attached. Like I think we needed a character like that who just appreciated him and loved him unconditionally. Because everybody else in the story we know does not necessarily fit that. So we wanted to show that there was someone like that who just really, really loved Farkle. Whereas with Yuri, we wanted to just have that, like, it's funny because sometimes I joke that, like, Yuri is a little bit like a Minkus version of Lucas, where it's just like a little emo, like, wearing his black sweatshirt, sitting at the dinner table, like, why do I have to socialize? I want to go in my room and put my headphones on. And I just think it's like that's a very common younger sibling to
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
Um, and that was really what he started as. And then things get a little more interesting when, like, he crosses paths with a gardener and they get into each other's lives, and we'll talk a lot more about them.
And the fact that he's also, like, they're all very smart as well.
Yes, intelligence is a very big thing in the Minkus family.
Anyway, so you didn't really answer the question, Maggie. What is the process for casting?
For casting, yeah. So basically, in terms of like, I'll say with the family, it's usually like, obviously, we're starting with some kind of family specifically because, again, they're related. It starts with some kind of character that we're looking at. So in this case, it's Farkle. It's like, okay, if I'm looking at these potential people to be in the cast, who looks enough like Cory Fogelmanis to presumably be their sibling?
Mm-hmm.
And with this, what I tend to do, if I'm looking in the range of, teenagers, so like 15 to 25-year-old characters,
Mm-hmm.
I, honest to God, I go on IMDb or I go on Google and I type in actors in their teens or actors in their 20s, and then I pull up IMDb lists because there are some pretty comprehensive IMDb lists out there.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I just kind of scroll through those, and they have 100+ entries, and I like keep my eye out. Like, could this person look like Cory Fogelmanis? Does this person look like, Tanner Buchanan? And it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like just piecing the puzzle together like that. That's what
Mm.
it usually is like if I'm like really looking for someone, like I don't have anyone in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, for some other people, sometimes it'll come from like recommendations, like the Yuri actor. He's like a model and like a young model, but he was someone that our beta Katie knew of and recommended to me of like, oh, they could be a Farkle sibling. Like I think Katie helped me a lot actually with casting the Minkus family because Katie is the biggest Farkle stan there is. So like that sometimes it's like, oh, like if I've seen someone a lot, like the reason that Rosie, we'll talk about the Gardeners later, but her actress, which is Lola Flannery, she had been in shows that I had seen a lot of. Like she was in Shadowhunters and she was in The 100. And I
Mm-hmm.
knew that she was a good actress and she was the right age. And then when I like went to her to look more in depth about it, it's like I, would compare to Tanner Buchanan. I'd be like, oh, they could definitely be siblings. You could believe
Mm.
that they were siblings. So sometimes it is pulling from my personal knowledge bank of like actors that I'm aware of,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of times if I need to just start from scratch, I'm like, I'm going to the IMDb list and I'm just looking and scanning for options. And then typically we will like, Esther and I will both do that, and then we'll come together like, here's 3 of my options, here's 3 of Esther's options, and
Mm-hmm.
we together choose like, let's go with this one. So that was
Uh-huh.
kind of the process for that.
Cool. But do you think this wouldn't have been purposeful, but the juxtaposition of Issa and Farkle's scenes like was obviously intentional,
Mm-hmm.
but the fact that, okay, no, I'm just reading too much into it, but this is like a Pride and Prejudice illusion. It's like this wealthy like area versus this like hectic like she's being
Mm-hmm.
bothered kind of thing. Oh, I'm just putting it out there. That's my take.
Yeah, I will say I want you to always be putting things out there. Never feel like you have to be like, "Oh, I'm reading too much into this," because by all means read everything into everything. I love it. Um I can confirm that that was not necessarily intentional because again, I did not know much about Pride and Prejudice, and as we know, in season 1 I was just writing shit. So
Hmm.
it was not as intentional as a lot of stuff in later seasons is, but I will take it. Like, let's, apply that. Let's
Ooh,
go for it,
okay.
especially knowing
Hmm.
what we know about these 2 characters as we go on.
Yep.
So I think that's really interesting. I like that.
Well, I'm good. I'm very glad about that because, I love to tie anything and everything to Pride and Prejudice.
I also wanted to say about the main guy. It's interesting that, as we know in Boy Meets World back in the day, um, in that show, like Cory and Stuart and Sean are all the same age. They're in the same
Mm,
grade.
yes,
But in Ambition, we changed it that the mink guy are older. Like Stuart and Jennifer are in their 40s,
which makes
whereas
sense.
Cory, Topanga, Sean are like mid to late 30s. And partially that's just us being like, I don't care about the source material specifics if I need to change it for a good reason.
Yeah.
But it's also, I wanted to play into that of like, Farkle is in a very stable family. And I think part of that is
Hmm.
because, I mean, it's not a perfect family, but they're stable. And I think part of that is because the parents are older and maybe had Raziel, the oldest sibling, when they were younger, in their 20s, but like they're in their 40s with all these kids. Like, they're not Riley, Cory and Topanga, and then like Grace and Kenneth, like all of these situations where it's so much more volatile. Valerie Dela Cruz, these are
Mm-hmm.
people that had babies like too young for their situation, and
Okay,
it
so it's
has lasting
propaganda.
impacts.
Mm-hmm.
It has lasting impacts. Whereas the Gardners, the Mink guy, Dylan's family, the Orlandos, like
The
the
Babineaux.
Garcias, all of their family, yeah, Babineaux, their families that clearly were making conscious decisions about the buildings of their family. And part of that
Mm,
was in age.
yeah. It goes to show that people who have the opportunity to put off those stages of their life then will potentially do better. I'm saying this as if like your writing is just like the proof of the world, but I mean, to me,
Well,
maybe,
art imitates life,
yep,
right?
it's true.
So yes, then we go into the next performance. I literally actually didn't even write this down in my notes as a song. I just forgot about it because it's like barely a performance. It's
It's
only the
40
first
seconds.
40 seconds. And I think I'm glad I included it still because you get the sense of like what the scene is going for.
Mm,
I will say we also have the first mention of the confessions page here. It's brief and it's just a little mention, but it is there. And then this thing unfolds. Chai is singing "Good for Chai." I like this song. It's my favorite song in Phantom of the Opera, but that's not saying much because I don't like Phantom of the Opera. So I
yeah.
remember when Emma and Hanny read this episode, they were like, Maggie is being a hater again because we have a Phantom of the Opera song, but it's only 40 seconds. And,
Yeah.
well, sorry that
Yeah.
I'm not sorry.
That is how the cookie crumbles.
Yes, that's how the Phantom operas. One thing that I wrote here about this moment where Farkle almost gets crushed, even though it's a bit dramatic to say crushed because it's like a very thin piece of wood. Like it would
Yeah.
hurt, but it would not
Yeah.
have killed him. Um, I think it's interesting. I'll just say Maya saves Farkle.
Yeah. I did notice that.
Period. End of sentence.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I'll
Yep.
say.
That's okay. Enough said.
Think on it. Ruminate on it. Wonder
Um,
about the reading into things. But
yeah.
yes,
And then Maya's actually much more shaken by the whole thing
yes.
than Farkle is.
Yeah, she kind of is shaken by it and she goes in the dressing room and kind of has a little like gotta calm down moment. And Riley comes and tries to offer her some support. I think it's worth noting here that Riley she mentions and clearly has calming techniques.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's interesting that she mentions that because it does again just call back to her own prior experiences.
Yeah, we know that I mean, from that we can tell that she deals with mental illness or just a lot of stress and it's actually really nice of her to reach out to Maya and Maya is just I mean, it's almost like a cliche like the mean girl. She's just like, no, you
Yes,
suck.
it's it's not the most deep writing, we can definitely say. I think like it is understandable why Maya is that way. I think we get the sense that she's very closed off to people in a
Yes.
personal way at this
Yeah.
point. But yes, it is a little like okay, great, thank you. Then in the boys' dressing room here, they're having a similar conversation about like, oh my god, like Farkle, you almost died. And he's like, shut up. But oh, interesting that Farkle almost died. Period. End of sentence. But I wanted to say, I think it is interesting that it notes here that it says Charlie and the others. So I think it's interesting that Charlie is named, wondering whether this ghost might be real. I think maybe this is reading a little bit into it, but I can read into it because it's my work.
Yeah.
Um, that I think it's interesting that Charlie is malleable to this
Yeah.
potential fear. Not necessarily because, I mean, I don't think he's someone who is very gullible or is
No,
quick to change his mind
I
about
wouldn't say
things,
so.
but I think it's interesting that he's feeling this way about this. And I feel like I think it's because for other reasons, he's convinced that something is coming for him. Like there's some kind
Oh,
of danger waiting for
yeah.
him. And so even if he doesn't consciously believe that this is something that could be happening, there's a
Yeah.
subconscious fear in him
That it's
that's like,
there for
well,
him.
maybe. Right.
Wow. I mean, and to be honest, like Charlie's whole life is structured by this imagined order of Catholicism and Christianity, and there's these intangible forces and beings, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that he could buy into this ghost.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's definitely a cool take that he was subconsciously like, yeah, okay, time's come.
Especially, I mean, because we just know that we don't see it at this point, but we know because we're
Mm-hmm.
so far ahead. But we know he's starting to cave to some things
Mm-hmm.
in his own life, and I think that he could be more malleable to this because he is scared of the fact that he is doing that.
He's like, oh, that's not a coincidence. Okay.
Right.
Same time,
Exactly.
same place. Like, what was he doing in that room where the thing fell? Who was he looking
Right.
at, you know? What was
Uh
he
huh.
thinking about? And voila.
Bam. We unpacked it. It's been unpacked. Um, and then on the other hand, Zay is a genius. He's the moment. He's like, y'all are stupid. I don't believe this shit. I'm gonna go figure this out. And he's iconic for that.
He is, and that's the thing, it's just his mind is always the next level.
Yes. I think it's interesting too that he is the one that is so like, this is some bullshit. And it's partially because
Hmm.
he's just like, this is some bullshit. But also
Hmm.
because I think it's been shown a lot later throughout the show that he is someone who is very, I would not say he's an atheist, but he's
Hmm.
very set in like, I know what's real and what isn't. And
Yes.
he kind of has a, at times, borderline dismissive, but also just very grounded perspective on things. And we see that
Yes.
come up a lot in the future for certain reasons. Um, but this is a good example of that. We know even like in season 3 when the winds of change thing is happening, like
Hmm.
Nigel's a little like, I don't know, guys. And Zay's like, could you shut up?
Like, stop.
So he's always been very much, even back in this episode, he's very like, no, this is not real. So then we have this scene that I appreciate. I think it's charming in its own way, but
Hmm.
Riley is on her way to lunch and Charlie catches up to her and he offers to have lunch with her. And there's this kind of thing again of Riley's perception of, why is he asking me that? Is he trying to flirt with me? I will say, I will defend Charlie here. And I'll say that knowing what we know about him and
Mm.
knowing, I think next episode, thinking about next episode put this in context for me because we know next episode some things develop and
Hmm.
he ends up getting posted on the confessions page with a certain person and that freaks him out. And I think that that moment in that episode is what makes him be like, fuck, I have to make a new plan. I have to recontrol the narrative. I have to fix
Hmm.
this.
Hmm.
But that doesn't happen yet. So I think in this
No,
episode, I
it's
truly think
genuine.
Charlie is just being nice. Yeah, I really think he's just being like, hey, you're new. Want to eat lunch?
Yeah, and you know what? He probably thinks this is like a cool, nice, pretty girl. Can't be too bad of an idea to be friends with her. Like,
Right. And
yeah.
then I mean, like, the conversation gets a little weird for certain reasons, but like, they are
Hmm.
having a relatively normal conversation here. Like, why
Yeah.
is everything sucky? Riley, like, he's not using her right now, but her using him,
Hmm.
hilarious. So painful and funny.
The fact that,
She's like,
yeah, it's
let
just
me bat
so
my
different.
eyelashes.
Hmm. It's so early on, and she's like, okay, I guess I'll just seduce my way to answers about this weird school that I've started at. I don't know. Give it a go.
And it's funny, like, Charlie answering there, like, I think he's so oblivious to her trying to flirt with him.
Yeah.
Like, but not even really, because she's not authentically doing it. Like, I think that it's hilarious because we know later he is so, like, when it comes to other guys, he's like, what is this conversation? What is that person thinking? And
Hmm.
are they flirting with me? Like, he can't interact with other guys. But with girls, like, I mean, Haley has been flirting with him for 3 years and he's just still like, meh. Like I think his radar doesn't work as we know. So I don't think he even would realize that Riley is trying to use him here. Like he's just like, okay, I'll chat.
Yeah, and he is a genuinely nice person. We know this. So it's actually really sweet that then after all that he's just like, "Yeah, so do you want to go to lunch?" And then she's just like, "No, I've to go. And then,
I forgot something.
which is kind of a blatant lie, Riley, but not really, because she has to do her girl boss shit and, you
Yes.
know,
I also think it's funny that when Charlie says, everyone's trying to prove they've got what it takes, Riley's like, Farkle. Like, Farkle's
hmm
the insane one, right? Yeah, I got that. And Charlie's like, well, yes, but
yes.
also everyone else. And he has that interesting moment of, going, everybody's got something to hide. You know what I mean? And Riley's like, sure. And I
No, I
feel
do not
like,
know. What do you mean?
right, like that is the weird moment here of like, what is Charlie trying to say? I feel like a little bit of it might be like he's sending out sonar. He's like, please understand I'm gay. Please understand I'm gay. Just know I don't have to tell you. Just
Yeah.
feel it by me like looking at you directly in the eyes. And of course, Riley's like, what the hell?
He's like, if I can just befriend someone and they just know without me saying it, then everything will be fine and I'll just be safe for once.
Yeah,
Oh,
literally.
baby.
This guy. I think it's interesting his choice of words. Him talking about trying to fix the situation. If someone could just exorcise whatever demon is haunting them, they'd be a hero.
Wow. Mm,
Like, why that word choice, Charlie? It's an interesting, weird thing to say.
the religiosity of it.
So, then we go into what is my favorite sequence of the episode.
It's iconic. It is legendary, one might say. A whole
She,
section.
yes, we
The
have
moment.
Riley going to do her girl boss investigating. And one thing I like about this, I will say actually to start, I had score music that I listened to when I was writing this. And it originally was in the playlists, but
Oh.
then later I was like, why is this doesn't need to be in here? So I removed it because it's not like a performance. But I will say, for my
Oh.
score appreciators out there, it is two songs from the Night Before Christmas soundtrack.
Oh.
It is Dr. Finkelstein slash The Forest, I think is what one of the tracks is called. And the other one is the Jack and Sally montage. I think that this scene is my favorite because A, it has some interesting creative elements to it that I'll explain.
Oh.
But B, it also feels like the most ambition tone scene in
Yes.
the episode where it doesn't feel as odd as the rest
Yes.
does.
Definitely. It feels like the people who you can kind of see later on. And you're like, yeah, that was them right then.
Yes, yes, exactly. One of the creative element that I like is this kind of direction that I have here about talking about how her perception, these sets that we come to know very well, the prop loft, the costume loft, set pieces, like they
Mm-hmm.
feel very scary to her here and they look
Ah,
almost intimidating because of the fact that they're so unknown to us right now and because it's a scary episode or whatever,
yeah.
but like I like that idea of like everything seems so scary on the surface because it's just so unfamiliar to her and
Mm-hmm.
has this reputation of being off limits. But same with the way she approaches the technician's booth as if it's like dangerous. But then like as we come to know, like these places are going to become very familiar to us and very
Yeah.
familiar to her. So I just like that idea of like again, the perception of something at first being kind of dramatized or dramatized, however you would say that,
Oh.
to then be peeled back later. And I think the same could be said for our little jump scare here.
That is really good take. Yeah, it's like, hey, you shouldn't be here. And it's like, oh, but should she though? Mm-mm-mm.
Yes, I love the idea of a jump scare that's not really a jump scare.
Mm-hmm.
Um like I always, there is that thing of like if I'm watching something, I don't like horror movies, I don't like horror content, I will say. But if I have to be forced to watch one of that tenor, it's like the moment the music gets quiet,
Mm-hmm.
something's about to happen. And that's very much what's going on here is she's reaching for that doorknob and the music has gone away and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my, what's gonna happen? And what happens is Lucas going, hey, from down below. And I will say there's another influence slash parallel here. If anybody has seen Anastasia, the movie Anastasia, one of my favorite movies of all time. And when Anastasia is going through her once upon a December montage and is in her old former home, but she doesn't know it's her former home yet, and having this big dramatic song moment, and then she lands in front of the portrait of her family, again, not realizing that that's her in the portrait. And it's this very like emotionally poignant moment, And Once Upon a December fades away, and it's very quiet as she's looking at this portrait. And then Dimitri, who is later her love interest, from off screen, goes, "Hey!" And we snap out of it. And Anastasia's like, "Oh my god, like, I'm so sorry. Where am I? Who are you?" And that is definitely being a little bit paralleled here.
Okay. I didn't know that. And I haven't seen Anastasia, so
You should watch it, first of all.
I know. The walking up the stairs to be eye level and quiet moment, pause, breath before the life-changing line, mind your own business, is just, I mean, that is cinema right there. Like, he's sort of, I feel like he doesn't know what he's going to do because he doesn't know what to do with this, like, not antagonistic feeling that he's, like, feeling. And so he's like, okay, I need to do something about this, but I don't know what I'm going to do. And he's like, if there'd been any of the other performers, he would have fully kept yelling. But then he's like, yeah. But with Riley, he's like, wait, but I don't necessarily.
Yes, I think it's a very interesting choice that as he approaches her, if you're looking to imply a power dynamic or to intimidate someone, you would not go at eye level with them. You would go on the same step as them and be taller than them so that you can have the power of height. So I do think it's interesting that he stops at the step below her so that they're at eye level. I think that that's a really interesting, just maybe subconscious choice on his part.
Yeah.
It's like we're gonna be at the same level here for a second. And I do think, look, I will say I love a trope in terms of a moment of very tense quiet of just looking at each other, whether it's early on, whether it's in a relationship. There is something about that. We got that going on
And
here.
we love it.
We don't know what their relationship's gonna be, but the moment of just let me examine you for a minute, let me take you in as I'm trying to figure you out. There's a subtext to that.
That honestly sounds like a Taylor Swift lyric. I'm not gonna lie. Let me take you in while I try to figure you out. And like,
ooh,
Maggie, get on that.
Look at me, Taylor Swift. I gotta write a song. I gotta call her right now. I think, yes. I mean, I am sorry to say, as much as I love this scene and I will take it for the romantic tension that it is, and I will not, it's television, so I'll leave it alone. But if it were me in this situation, I would be scared shitless because men. You know, no disrespect to my boy Lucas, but if I don't know this man and he's approaching me, I would have ran. I would have been like, goodbye.
Yeah, I mean, she was very scared. She was that close to running, but she also has a little bit of a danger-seeking streak in her. So
she does.
You know, I think that just allowed her to stay a little bit longer.
And I think also she was like it says, like her brain was like, no, I'm done. I'm turning off. So it's like, well, can't move my feet because my brain's not working. Like, it's like, this is a thing that I will gladly excuse for realism. It's like, we don't need to worry about the fact that if a man approached me, I would run. We will just let this be what it is. But yes, I love that line of Lucas, his only sentiment being mind your own business. And that's a very loaded sentiment.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that he says that, and she will not.
She will not.
That is like the antithesis of Riley
She
Matthews.
refuses, and she decides to make this entire thing her business, and she decides to make him her business. So
Eric said, don't get anywhere near her, don't look at him.
Yep.
And Riley said, I won't be taking that advice. And then Lucas said, mind your own business. And Riley said, I won't be taking that advice. Thank you, but no.
She's just living her life. She's independent. She doesn't listen to these men when they tell her to do things. And that is totally valid.
But yes, this is my favorite scene in the episode because I think it feels this feels like ambition.
Yeah.
So then we move into getting into the next performance. I will say, I wrote a note here because Zay is like in class and he's trying to figure out what's going on. And he notices that like Dave and Jade are like watching him. And he's like, why are they doing that? Because I don't care about them and they don't care about me. So he decides, being the, very pleasant, friendly, most popular kid in their grade that he is, he just walks up to them and is like, hey, what's going on? Anything going on? And I love that Jade is like unflappable. She's like, no, everything's fine. And it's Dave the one that's like, bye. I'm just saying because of that, like Jade, smooth operator, put her on my heist team. Like Girl's so suave. Like, good for her.
Yes. Okay, so Heist Team AU, you know I love it. Jade is on the team. Riley is on the team.
Yes.
Zay is on the team. We love it. It's beautiful.
Gotta get him in there. That can be our question for the audience, and our question for next time. We can think about this and come back to it. If you're building your heist team, if you're building your Ocean's 8 or Ocean's 11 or whatever, your team of 8 for a heist, who's going to be on your ambition heist team? Think about it, process it, and we'll come back to it.
Okay.
But Jade's going to be online.
All right. So this performance, yeah. So
to me, I would say this is actually one of my favorite performances in the episode, just because the performances this episode, like, aren't that great. But I like this one because I think the concept is so clear.
right.
Like, I can very clearly see this idea of, like, Zay doing the song and, like, kind of just be looking over his shoulder, and we're seeing him almost catching them watching him. Like, I can see that piece of it. And that's why I think I like this performance, because it is clear enough to me that I'm like, I get why this is here. I see what I'm supposed to be seeing. But, like, this is clearly, this song is fun, but it's one that I would, like, not listen to unless I was listening to a Halloween playlist.
Exactly.
So.
Exactly. It's just a bit, I don't know, it's almost like the concept is too clear. It's like, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Thank you. I mean, at least it's Zay Babineaux. So
yeah, well, that's the thing. It's like,
iconic.
it would be good.
Yeah. Again, like, does this episode need to exist? Well, debates. So then we have Zay catches Issa editing the footage and kind of gets in on the plan, figures out what's going on, and we have this interesting, fun little kind of diva moment for Zay, of Zay being like, actually, I won't rat you out and I'll help you because I want to torment Farkle. Like, the fact that he specifically is like, I know Farkle's psyche, so I know how to destroy him, is like, Zay is the least diva of the divas, but he also is like, I'm ready. Like, if I need to be, they better watch out.
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting, like, little moment for him.
Yeah. The thing is that he is, like, diva, but he's, like, next level diva, where it's not just, like, he acts on emotion. He has depth, Not that Farkle and Maya don't, but also they don't sometimes. So.
Sometimes. Yeah. So then we have them pulling. I'm glad this is kind of brief, but they have this thing of them completing the prank.
It's so brief that if you skim it, you will probably miss it.
They essentially do this prank where their final act is that they convincingly, it says, pretend to kill Zay because the ghost killed him. And first, let me say, if this happened in real life, they should be suspended for pretending to kill a student.
Yeah.
And freaking everybody else out.
Like,
and I think
damaged.
Yes. Coming down to that, I will say I think that is my biggest problem with this episode, is that there's set pieces like this that I just don't believe. I'm like, I don't buy that this would happen. I don't think that they could get away with it. I don't think it would necessarily work. And I think that's kind of why the whole episode falls apart, because it's like the plot that we're running on doesn't make sense. Like, it doesn't, I don't believe it. And I think that that's the biggest reason that I don't like this episode.
Yeah, this whole bit is very, like, aside from it being just extremely quick, which also just takes away, if you'd written this very detailed, like, description of something, then it would obviously be a different story, but not something that I can actually see happening, especially knowing the characters.
Yeah, and especially in the show, like Ambition. This is not something like we've had weird sequences, like in season 3 when they break the curtains and destroy the stage because Farkle was bony and got pushed into a ladder.
Yeah.
But that sequence was specific. It showed exactly how every moment of it unfolded.
Yeah.
And it was believable. Like, you could believe that, yes, it's a little outlandish, but sure, this could happen. And there were consequences for it. Like, they then had to repair it, and they had to pay for it, and they had to, like, it was just much more intentional. And I think this is just, again, like, yeah, it's the main reason I don't like it, because I'm like, I don't buy that this would happen.
And their reactions are all they're just so young, and it's hard to vibe. It's hard to vibe with it, It's just it's a bit too much of a silly, goofy mood for me.
Silly, goofy mood. Yeah, no, I get it. And I will say too, I think that, again, this is why I'm like, there's elements of this, like, I think the whole idea of the techies had to give something up to help the performers, and they're upset about that.
Yeah.
And we have this recruitment thing. I think you could take those elements and put them in 103, which is an episode about being under pressure.
Yeah.
If you had that and the tutoring thing going on at the same time, I think it would have still been fine. I think we could have kept those elements.
Yeah.
That are the elements that work about this episode, and just lost this kind of weird thing. And it would have been, I don't think we would have missed that much if this episode was cut.
I have to agree. At the end of the day,
if people, like, if you're trying to convince someone to read Ambition and they've gotten through the pilot, if you need to, feel free to tell them this episode is not like the other episodes. Like, you can disparage this episode as much as you want if you're trying to sell it, because I disparage the episode and I don't like it. So, like, it's for legacy, I'm not going to get rid of it, but tell people if they really want to skip it, they can skip it.
I mean, not much progress is made, let's be real, on any of the major themes of the entire show, of the entire season, of the characters. It's very, there's basically the only thing is like establishing the sort of divide a little bit, and that everyone is very tense and likes to yell at each other.
Yeah, speaking of, the next scene after they all yell at each other is that Angela and Sean are yelling at each other again.
Mhm.
And we don't even really need to rehash it because it's the same thing they're always yelling about. So, moving on.
This performance.
Yes, Riley has a small performance for herself. She does a ukulele version of Creep by Radiohead. And it's not a very big performance. It's not like dramatic, but it's pretty.
Yeah, it's lovely, and it's not really even a performance because she's by herself.
Mm-hmm.
It's more like she's just singing her little song.
Yes, and I do think that I think it's very much her vibe, and I do think that there is a good lyric inclusion there of like the question of what the hell am I doing here? I don't belong here.
Yeah,
I think she's definitely feeling that a little bit at this point. So that was it was a good song choice.
Yeah, I agree.
Good job, Maggie of 2019.
Boop, boop.
Then we go to, like, basically the episode, like, this dramatic thing happens, and then there's, like, 4 scenes, and then it's over.
Yeah.
We go into the JQA recruitment thing. The performers are like, we're fucked because we have not practiced this. It's not good. So then Angela's like, whoa, is there anything else we can pull together at the last second? And all the theater nerds go time warp because theater nerds love Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Mm-hmm.
So we are able to just pull that together real fast, which I will say again, Glee Cast shows up, but it's a fun song. So I'm like, okay, great. Let's end it on that. Good note. This moment here at the end where Sean tells Lucas and Issa to go to the show anyway, to go to the conference thing and show off her film.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a good moment. I enjoy that moment.
That is a top 5 Sean moment, 100%.
Yes. And I think you could have had this if we had moved this to episode 3. Could have still had it. It wouldn't have to go away.
Yeah.
But I think that he has this line. This is my Stan Sean moment of this line I really love, where he says, look, sometimes you can't let the man tell you what to do or how to be. If something is important, if it matters, you go out and you do it anyway. Only you can decide who you are and what matters. You stand up for yourself. Do you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
I love it. I love the sentiment. I love
that it feels like?
It shows.
It feels like very Friday Night Lights, Coach Taylor talking to his, like, Tim Riggins, like, the others, Flash and Matt, like, he's like, you gotta go, and you gotta do it yourself, and we're gonna win the state, or whatever. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't know, I think it is it's like the one line in this episode that is thematic ambition.
Yeah.
Because this is a line that you could apply to many things to come.
Definitely.
So I'm glad it exists.
Okay.
For all of the reasons I don't like this episode, I'm glad this scene exists. I'm glad that I think it's a very interesting actually form of foreshadowing here.
Oh.
That we know now that like Lucas and Issa are kind of known as the de facto techie leaders.
Yeah.
And when Sean is telling them to leave, his go-to person is Dylan. He says, Dylan, can you cover the board?
Yeah.
And Dylan's like, aye, aye, Captain. And I think it's very interesting to note that, thinking about the fact that, as we know, in going into the end of season 2 into season 3, as Lucas is stepping kind of back from being a leadership role, Issa's in the performer / she's in both worlds. They've kind of lost figureheads.
Yeah.
Who steps into that space?
Dylan.
So I think that that's a very interesting, very small moment of like, we're already nodding to that he has that capability.
We love it.
So yeah, then we have Time Warp. It's fun. We see a glimpse of Michael Jacobs, whatever.
Whatever.
Then we have Lucas and Issa in the parking lot together, getting ready to go to the thing. It's a nice little friendship moment. I will say it's funny that everybody just lets Lucas drive their car.
Yeah.
Like,
Why are they
is that the
doing
best
that?
idea? I don't know. I won't argue with it. I guess it's fine until he starts stealing cars.
Yeah, driving them when actually lent them is better than stealing them. So
Right. Yeah. And then that's
it.
that's it. We made
We
it
did
to the end
it.
of that experience. So, yeah, I think I've said it enough times in the episode, but I don't like it. But I think, again, it just feels very much of a plot product of what the show once was,
Yes.
rather than what it becomes and what it actually is. And that's not awful, but is this a skip episode? Yeah,
Yeah.
kind of.
Yeah, I mean, definitely in a reread, especially as someone who doesn't want to waste time reading when it takes them so long, I'm gonna skip.
Yeah, and that's valid. I mean, it has moments I love, it has lines I love.
Yeah.
But again, I could probably, I'm not going to because I'm lazy, but I could probably very easily repurpose it to have the important bits in a later episode or an earlier episode. And
Yeah.
this could just not exist. So it's very much a filler trying to find the tone episode. Did you have any kind of standout, like characters or moments or performances?
I would say my standout character is probably, I mean, honestly, it's just no one but Lucas.
Yeah, I mean, for me it was Lucas and Issa, like
Yeah,
their dynamic. I think
definitely.
was it that at least got to shine
Yeah,
in this episode.
and that's a win. They were the only
Yeah.
ones who I felt like got to shine necessarily, which is just
Mm-hmm.
fine because there are many times the others get to shine in their performances.
So that was 102. We will be jumping into 103 Under Pressure next episode, which for me, I think is when things really start to gel and find their intrigue, and we get the real start of some of the interesting relationships and characters. So I'm excited for like kind of the real entry into the actual season.
This was super fun once again. And I'm looking forward to the next one even more.
As usual, for everyone, again, if you want to send us a question or react or whatever thing, you can find us on Instagram, you can find us on Tumblr, you can find us on YouTube where you might be listening to this. Feel free to drop a comment. And otherwise, enjoy the next couple weeks. What say you, Maddie? Anything else to say?
What say I? Well, I might just go eat some sweets now, and I will probably not watch anything scary.
I know it's what, Halloween in January, so
Yeah, Halloween January. It's a new thing. The scariness of the new year.
scariness of this bad ambition episode.
That is the truth. That is the reason it's the Halloween episode because it is so
weird.
so horrifically just unusual.
And you're right, and I will not argue with you on that. All right, well,
hopefully our episode talking about it has been a lot more enjoyable than the actual episode itself. And we are looking forward to talking to you again in a couple of weeks.
Yep. Welcome to Adams. This is it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.